This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. Another year, another draft, another batch of players coming in. And similar to last year, Browns don't really pick until the third round. Last year, I think they traded back, right? This year, they quasi traded back, right? So there is that. But to talk about the Browns draft and bringing in Jake Burns from the OBR film breakdowns, and also his podcast. Jake, just overall, first kind of knee-jerk reaction thoughts about this year's draft.
I think the way it's sort of being framed in a broader perspective is that they got really great value on these guys. So, I am torn a little bit on the trust people have in consensus mock drafts that are out there. They're actually not entirely too far off of careers. The justification of what's around the consensus based on all the different draft boards and player rankings that the bigger names in the industry put out all the way down through some of the lower level, lesser known names is probably the way to say it. It seems like people think the Browns did relatively well, and I think they focused on more of the career work of some of these guys than last year's work. So I think there's a lot to be excited about. I think there's some pieces here that make a lot of sense, both now and later. And then obviously some spots here that I would fairly question because I don't love the decisions that they made. And it's important to remember, you can cover this team and not love every decision that they make. That's okay. Doesn't mean you're a hater. Doesn't mean you love the team. And what we try to do, at least I try to do with the OBR, and I know you try to do as well, is provide analysis. And that doesn't mean giving justification for every single decision the organization makes. And again, try to say when they do well, you say when they do well. When it's not something you think they did entirely, the process didn't entirely work out or come to the right conclusion. I think it's fair to have conversations around that. So there's certainly some picks on both sides of that equation here.
Yeah, definitely. Let's start with the first pick that the Browns made here. Cedric Tillman. I'll say for me, I've been complaining about how little our wide receivers have been. I think ever since we got traded for Jarvis Landry, we've had a very small kind of mainly sub 6 foot wide receiving core for a very long time. And I felt like that led to some issues in the red zone with some of these teams at times. So Cedric Tillman, he plays big. He is 6'2", 6'3", but 215, so he's not like a monster. He's not like Josh Gordon, who's 6'6", 235 or something like that, running 4.3. But he is a bigger bodied wide receiver. He likes to play a little bit more physical. What did you think about the pick there?
Yeah, so this is these two picks we're going to start talking about were, I think, pretty unexpected from a lot of people, but largely because they break the mold of some typical what are known as guardrails or draft guidances that the Browns have been following, which is the third round has been under the age of 22 and a half, essentially, and then a relative athletic score of a certain number. So Tillman checks in right now at just over 23. He'll be close to 23 and a half. He's a 419 birthday, so he'll be 23 and some change into his rookie season at the start of it. So that's new. They have not gone to that degree of age yet. So what we're always doing is getting new evidence. But I think largely Cedric Tillman wasn't discussed as much as, for example, his teammate Jalen Hyatt, who went to pick before him because of this, right? We think that the Browns have sort of filtered in some of these decisions into sort of running it through a filter and putting these guys into boxes, where this is an example of their willingness to go outside of that box. So Tillman surprised a lot of people. I think you made a couple good points already. 6'3", 215, big body, and he plays that way, right? He comes from Bishop Gorman, which, if you don't know high school football out in Las Vegas, is one of the premier high school football programs in the country. Some big-time players. The teammate Dorian Thompson-Robinson has gone through there, as well as former Ohio State quarterback, who's the kid that was all over Ohio State.
He's Tate former Martell everybody's quarterback. He's been at 18 schools. I think he's still in college.
You might be actually. You get a couple extra years
I
granted
haven't
in there,
seen him
but
pop
yeah,
up in the spring league yet, so like that's the next logical step for him.
I'm kind of surprised about that. I haven't heard more of him from some of those other lower level leagues, but yeah. So Bishop Gorman at the time, teammates with like Brevin Jordan was there, Jalen Naylor was a Michigan State kid, Haskell Garrett, Buckeye was there, and we talked about DTR. And he produced, obviously did well there. He was a 3-star recruit, though, not as widely known as some of the others that even went to Tennessee in his class. But what stood out to a lot of the people was the frame and the way he played around that frame. So um, he stays there, ends up being 5 years. He doesn't produce much in his first 3 years. He played, he got around, but he didn't play much. He redshirted his first year, comes back in 21 and puts up the first Tennessee 1,000-yard season since Justin Hunter, which is a name from the past back in 2012. 64 catches, 1,081 yards, 12 touchdowns. Put together a really good junior season. A lot of promise, right? You got some offseason awards. He did pretty well, and then next year, 22, comes back and unfortunately gets hurt halfway through the year and misses time. The ankle surgery. It's what it's called, tightrope ankle surgery. So he had a little bit of that his senior year that caused him to lose the shine that he was gaining after his junior year. And remember, his junior year, he had like a 6 for 152 against Alabama for a touchdown. He had a 10 for 200 against that Georgia defense that was phenomenal. He put up some massive games, but I mean, the Tennessee offense, if you go really watch them, it's strange. Tillman didn't move from the right side. So he was usually what some teams do this, not all teams do it, but some will do a right and left outside receiver. He was the right outside receiver and he didn't move very much. So there's going to be some stuff every now and again in like empty sets. He would slide inside and play slot on that side because maybe a running back was outside wide or a tight end, his formation dictation put him outside. But for the most part, he was an outside right side receiver and an RPO heavy, kind of gimmicky offense in terms of what the core of that offense did. He did some things that I think you'll see at the NFL level, the types of routes he was running, obviously takeoff, posts, digs, slants, the stuff you'll see from that outside receiver. But the offense in and of itself gives a lot of people hesitation because, and especially somebody like Hendon Hooker who came into this draft, because it was very different, very gimmicky in a sense. So, what do you like about him? Again, big body, can go up and catch the football, and he catches everything. He only had five drops in his entire career and crossed 109 targets. 109 receptions, 1,622 yards, 17 touchdowns. Only 5 drops is what you like to see. I think he's got a really big frame and obviously uses that frame to go up and catch the football. Late hands on throws that are up over top of defensive backs who are blind, don't see it. That's something that stood out to me. The body control, obviously a huge part of it. He's a build-up acceleration runner, a lot like DPJ, tracks the football well when it's deep downfield. I think that's pretty evident. They didn't give him a ton of opportunities in space to make plays, but he's decent. His junior year was better with the yards after catch. He can make a guy miss. He's not a fluid, loose-hipped athlete where he can make people miss, stop, start, but he can make people miss because he's just a powerful guy. And I think that shows itself on a lot of the screen game stuff that they would do over there. So what's he have to get better at to go to the next level if he's going to be like an X solo side, short side wide receiver, who can win some of those quicker routes, or even a Z, maybe put him to the wide side of the field and let him run some of those build-up acceleration routes, snap off the dig route, deep downfield, that kind of stuff. I'll be interested to see what they do with him. But I think he has to get better with his release package and the top of the routes, because those are two things that stand out to me. Sometimes he's unable to do the little subtle things that create separation at the top of a route. I think he could get better at snapping off some of those routes, whether you're running a 10 to 8 quick comeback, a deeper, more 18 to 15, or some of those 10 to 8, 12 to 10 curls, or needing to put the pressure on somebody to get back inside to run a dig route or a slant. He's just got to get better at that. I think he's got people here to help him. But overall, it's a good pick. I mean, he's a good wide receiver who fills a bigger body need. So might be like you'd probably call it a limited linear route tree is what he's known for. Bigger target guy, but I think he's got enough acceleration and strength on the football field to really handle a lot of the types of throws that'll be put in his direction. Should be an X. I see him as a guy, if they don't want to keep Donovan Peoples-Jones because he prices out, or they just want to let him walk, whatever that decision might be, maybe he takes steps back this year, whatever, could be anything. You never know. He's certainly a player that you could see them put in that mold. Now, if they think there's more to him as they get time with him and they could see him playing a little bit more Z, then there's a chance he takes over for Amari Cooper when Cooper eventually moves on too. So there's a lot to like about Cedric Tillman. I think he tracks the football and his the way he orients his hands around catching it is pretty fluid. So I don't see him having an issue catching the football where some other guys are maybe clap catchers or framers or trap guys. He doesn't do a lot of that stuff. I think he does a really good job of framing up a football. So he should be a pretty sturdy. I don't think he'll be great, but he should be a very sturdy, above average to good wide receiver here. I think that's the goal with that pick, is to be sort of safe and look for a type, and they found their type, and I'm okay with that.
You know, it's interesting too with him because if he would have came out last year, he probably would have got drafted around the same place, even though he would have been a much more like sought after prospect just because how deep that class was last year.
That's
a
fact.
This year, so he makes the smart move to not go out, and then unfortunately hurts his ankle, doesn't really have the season that he wanted to have. And now he ends up being in the same spot. So sometimes you're just destined for a spot in the draft. Let's talk about the second pick. I wasn't a huge fan of this pick here. I wanted a D tackle. I didn't specifically love this prospect, Siaki Ika out of Baylor. Big body, you know, it seems like people can't stop themselves whenever they see like a big 300+ pound Samoan dude to say Vita Vea or something like that, or even Danny Shelton. But we have to remember those dudes are first round picks. Like even Danny Shelton wasn't the 40-time beast or anything like that, but he was short area quickness. Like he had a lot of that coming out of Washington. I didn't necessarily see that type of athleticism from him at Baylor. And that's kind of what concerns me, because if you're just a big body nowadays in NFL, it's not really a lot to do with you, especially in a wide nine.
Yep. Yeah, there's reasons to be concerned. I mean, I talked about with Tillman how he broke the age guardrail, and that's sort of why people didn't study him. The same with the athleticism guardrail. They've typically, outside of David Bell, who was still not a disaster RAS score, he ended up being near a 5, just below a 5. Ika was in the 2s. I mean, we've heard of him. We've talked about him. When you're studying a class of defensive tackles, you give him some attention, but his athletic score was really low. I mean, the thing that concerns you about him is he's a 5'4", 40 guy at 335, 40 pounds, which puts him, you know, in a really dangerous weight area where he's already talked about, you know, needing to lose weight, and they want him to lose weight. That's tricky. It's certainly not something, and we'll talk about DeJuan Jones in a minute. It's not something you love, but with Ika, you can stomach a guy being really big like that, no pun intended, if he's got long arms and he's a bench press strength freak. We didn't get a bench press from him, and his arms are not long. His wingspan is not long.
That's super concerning to not get a bench press out of a guy with short arms, right? Like that's
the concern.
The long arm guys, like what if the DeJuan Jones, he has like 35, 36-inch arms, right?
Yeah, he's massive.
He's massively long. So like the bench press number for him is going to look underwhelming, because when you are that long, it's a different exercise. But the short arm guys, like those dudes should be able to put out, like you look at the bench press champions, they're usually that profile body weight, and they can usually get it up 20 to 30 times. And for somebody to be 330, not do the bench press, it's like, what were you putting up?
And those were choices.
That's usually what you really want to do, right?
Exactly. He didn't jump or do the bench. So you know, the things I think that he must not have thought he was going to do well, because usually a big body guy who knows he's not going to run well or jump well will do the bench to show you this element of who he is, and he didn't do any of those things. So he decided to run a 40, which was going to be bad. He had to know that because of his sheer size. Like he tested at here's something else that concerns me. He tested at the combine 6'3", 335. His pro day, which is inside of 2 months, no matter what. I don't have the exact date of the pro day at Baylor, but he checked in at 347 at his pro day. So that's 12 pounds of weight just put right back on. That's the concern here, is that this guy can never find that weight success that he's supposed to be at. On top of short arms, we have to presume he's not very strong if he's not going to bench press total for you. It all adds up for me, and I'm very concerned with I get the reasoning I certainly know that they want to be able to stop the run by having somebody that can sit inside that A gap either side, wherever you're putting your strength, and just have him sit there and eat two blockers. I totally get it. But again, at pick 98, if you're making a justification for a player that just makes everybody's, hopefully, just makes everybody's life easier, and he's not even the one making plays, then you start to get a little concerned because you want that guy to also make some plays. That's what you're also a top 100 pick paying him to do, not just eat bodies, because eventually those bodies will get away from you, but they'll also, can this guy make a play or two? And yeah, there are some elements that tell you he can, right? Like he's wide hipped, but he is pretty agile on tape. He does have, for the size of guy he is, and I think if you put a like width of body test out there, he'd compete with anybody. He's just a wide human being. He's actually got some pretty good lateral flow and body control. Like he can really move down the line of scrimmage. And maybe and it's possible, Quincy, he's a better player than Tester. That happens every year. The hands are pretty violent to get where he needs to go. He does actually stack and shed decently. I've seen some stuff there that I like, and he can be violent at times, and he does hustle. I'll give him credit. He does. You like Danny Shelton for being like a late to pile flop on guy. I think he'll do some of that for you too, to bring back some twitchy memories for people at times. But I do think he has a chance to be, because he plays hard and he's got good lateral quickness, to make some plays at the NFL level. Now, again, he had 6 tackles for loss and 4.5 sacks in his junior year. The senior year is where it plummets. But it's interesting too. So he was a BYU family guy, ends up going to LSU though, transfers out of LSU after playing more his freshman year than his sophomore year, because he entered the transfer portal in October of his sophomore year. He goes in 21 to Baylor. He's a second team all Big 12 guy, defensive newcomer of the year. He doesn't have really much production at all just last year, but he was still, despite having no sacks and 2 tackles for loss, that's it. He was still first team all Big 12 and a team captain. So, you might have some questions on a couple things. If he's not producing, is he still impacting the game enough where other coaches are voting for him to be a serious offseason award winner? Well, that seems to be true. Like, he did impact games enough that coaches thought and the media thought he had a deserving first team all Big 12. And then, you see a guy who leaves a program in October of a season. You get worried about that, as like, many elements of character, sticking with it, quitting things, giving up. Well, he was a team captain at Baylor, so his teammates really enjoyed him. So that does help, right? So he's coming from that Dave Aranda 3-3-5 scheme, which is wild. I mean, I don't know if you ever spend time looking at like tight fronts and penny fronts and all the weird stuff those teams are doing to mitigate some of these
Georgia
offenses.
used to do some of that weird stuff, like not even that long ago when I was looking at that disease tape. Yeah, where they come like 3-1 box and everything like that.
Yeah, they get weird, man, to try to make linebacker flow difficult. So he played like all over. He was a 1 tech, a 2-eye, a 3. I think his best result here is like a shade, where he's over the center a majority of the time, and he gets lined up and plays against centers. And his pass rush technique, he's got a swim move, but teams start to figure out he uses that swim move way too much, and have sometimes really taken advantage and buried him off of it. So it's good when it works, but his snap anticipation isn't always good enough to make it consistently work. So you get concerned about that a little bit. He doesn't have a consistent pass rush move.
If your best move at like almost 400 pounds is a swim move, if you get caught in that takes away all the advantage of you being exposed. 400 pounds.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It can get exposed. He needs to develop a bull rush, and hopefully like Dalvin can work with him and his D-line coach on the push-pull moves that come off of a bull rush. He needs to anchor into some of those moves, because what you want from him is, be able to anchor a gap and a half in run game, right? Where you're taking 2 people out. You're able to play the A gap for cutbacks or downhill run schemes. And then he can bull rush his way into the backfield through a center a couple times a game to get you some pressures, because like I said, nimble guy. He's disruptive on tape at times. With when you go watch his highlights, there are some really powerful looking plays, right? Impressive plays, absolutely. But he doesn't do it consistently enough, and at times just too slow off the football. But if he's an early down player for them, is a guy who can really help again take the offenses from playing with 10 guys. If you take the quarterback away and say, offense goes from 10 guys down to 9.5 or 9 because he's eating up 2 in run game, that's probably a an accomplishment. Someone said in the media day, and you mentioned the name Vita Vea too. He's not anywhere near Vita Vea because Vita Vea is a freak of nature. He's a power
Vita Vea
speed
could play
freak.
edge sometimes.
He's a freak. He's not. He's a freak. But you could see him being a version of Danny Shelton, right? A
Yeah,
version of him, and getting Danny Shelton not pick 12, pick 98.
it's
And
fine.
if you can get a guy who plays in a similar fashion to be able to give you 25 snaps a game, doing what Danny Shelton really what he did in New England was more what you wanted. That's fine. That can be stomachable. So that's what you're hoping for, and it's not a great outcome because I like high athlete lotto ticket guys who could become something more. I think just the best version of Ika is that he's helping other people be great. And that's sort of like, I feel like I could get that later on, way later. And I can almost get that in free agency with guys who have proven themselves and they're cheap. Think Al Woods, and maybe they still do end up signing Al Woods. But I just like, again, like when a guy like Adi Adebawore is there, who's a bit of a tweener, I get it, but like, has athletic upside to become a chance to become something special. I'm always into taking lotto tickets, but I get, Schwartz loves him. Schwartz has forgot more about football than I'll ever know, but it doesn't make those guys infallible when picking players. They can mess up the same way you and I can mess up a prospect evaluation too. So I get the angle. They want to stop the run. You want a big body. I see it. But I also know that this is a very limited upside pick that if even to get the best version of him, you're getting like a poor man's Danny Shelton. So there it is.
Yeah, and the last thing I'd be concerned about with him too is like it seems like the paradigm for what plays inside has changed in the last 10 years where, even now when we look at like the best run stuffers, these are long, almost sometimes lanky dudes that are some of the better run defenders in the league. You look at like a Montez Sweat, there's somebody on the Jets, another long, strong guy. Like they're usually these 6'7", 280, 290 body types that teams are really liking to kick inside a little bit more because they can see some more athletic run. And with everybody running these wide zones too, right, where you can just kind of run away from a big body, it does help to have that length there. And for him not to be especially like long, but just big, I wonder if this is a guy who maybe 10 years ago gets drafted a lot higher and has more of a use in the league, but I don't know how much of a use he has now. It's kind of like drafting a guy who has like a lot of post moves in basketball. It's like, I don't know if that's where the league is at anymore.
Yep. And another note on, some of those guardrails, he's 22 and a half right now. So he'll play close to his rookie year starting at 23. So again, like the oldest guy they drafted was at this slot, not later, but right now was Jordan Elliott at 22.7 years old. So we had kind of tried to fit that. So he's 22.4. So they're just sort of getting into that range where they're showing you that they're going to test some of the age stuff that they've traditionally done, which I want them to. I don't want the Browns to be predictable because if we can predict who they're going to pick based on age and athleticism, then every other team can, and they can do things to manipulate that and manipulate their draft board to get in front of the Browns if they got a player they want. So we want them to be a little bit more unpredictable. So again, though, more data, the better in terms of knowing what they have done and what they did in this one.